We are delighted to have with us Dave Harvey to talk about what healthy church leadership looks like, as well as telling us about his brand new book, The Plurality Principle. Hello and welcome to Exposit The Word, Dave.
David, great to be with you.
Thank you. Before we get stuck into today's topic, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you come to write this book.
Well, I'm married to Kim. We've been married for 38 years, 4 kids, 6 grandkids. And I serve as the president of Great Commission Collective. That's a ministry that's kind of dedicated to church planting and strengthening leaders. And that puts me in connection with church planters and pastors in our country and really all the countries that we're working in. And so then in addition to that, I've served on several eldership teams over the last 3 decades. And so those things have given me a vantage point of just seeing the needs of local churches, the needs of pastors and elders. And after spending that time, I mean, like I said, more than 3 decades serving pastors and elders in the local church and in networks, I'd say this issue of team leadership, or what I call in the book plurality, is one of the most significant weaknesses I encounter in churches.
Yeah.
And so David, it's not like the concept of plurality is under dispute, because that's used all the time. It's the practice of plurality. So I wanted to write something on that.
Yeah, awesome. So you've just mentioned your new book. Tell us a little bit about how you come to write that, Dave.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of really good books that have helped me on eldership and leadership that have helped to form and shape me. But I didn't see a lot of books out there that specifically address the practice of team ministry, of plurality in practice, and so it's kind of an under-addressed topic in the resources that are available. And I think that kind of intrigued me. I think also, David, that just as I've looked at some of the fallen celebrity pastor issues and individuals, one of the common denominators among almost all of them was that they established a kind of pseudo plurality, a select group of external peers for care and accountability rather than local church elders. And I mean, we could talk about that more if you want to, but just in seeing that, I realized, okay, well, there's another example of where plurality makes all the difference. And so I think some of those things, I wanted to bring clarity on how first among equals operates within a strong plurality. I think it was some of those things that kind of converged in my mind, David, that created the desire to write it.
Yeah, brilliant. So what does a healthy church leadership model look like? And what does the Bible teach us about this?
Well, the Bible teaches that a plurality of leaders, but plurality just describes the overwhelming New Testament evidence that local church leadership was shared. It was shared by elders, and that's because the New Testament terms for pastor, overseer, elder are never used to talk about a single leader ruling or governing the church. It's always used in the plural. And so, we could look through a lot of passages just to justify that. And the assumption there, David, is that the authority for the church inheres not in that the single leader, the big man, the individual that's supposed to be driving it forward with vision and clarity, but it inheres or is invested into a group of people that are supposed to lead the church. And in leading it, they create a kind of microcosm where what they become ultimately shapes the church and shapes the direction of the church. And so building a plurality and dedicating time to a plurality makes a real difference for the trajectory of the church. That's why the big idea of the book that I wrote is that the quality of your plurality determines the health of the church.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned that you've got over 30 years experience, and obviously you've done lots of research for this book as well. What are the most common reasons that churches don't have a plurality?
Well, sometimes it's because that when they get started, they're started by a church planter or a single individual that kind of gets things going, and the vision and drive that they bring to the leadership task kind of gets things up off the ground. And sometimes it's not in their mind to transfer leadership to others. Sometimes they like just being at the center of things, and so you have that whole thing that happens on the front end where plurality doesn't become emphasized or isn't a goal going into it. So that's really common in the church planting world. I think for others, sometimes they just, elders form around a single leader that maybe they have hired, the senior pastor, the lead pastor, whatever we call him, and they want him to drive ministry forward and to do the work of ministry in the church, and are satisfied that things are getting done. And so they don't really think much about what it means for them to form together, to share ministry, to share care, and to share accountability with each other, and to do ministry together. So that, I think that's a common one as well.
Yeah. And just to help us define terms, do you include deacons when you talk about plurality?
I think plurality should include deacons. In other words, deacons are used in the plural as well. And so when churches endeavor to set up the diaconate, it's good to set up more than one and to have them collaborating together as well.
Yeah, sure. So fascinated by what you were just saying about the church planting situation. What advice would you have? And obviously I know you've got a lot of experience in this as well, Dave. What advice would you have to a church planter that is going to a region, they have the aspirations to have a plurality, but there just aren't any qualified people, to come alongside them and form that leadership team, if you like? What advice would you have to somebody in that situation?
Yeah, I would tell them to go ahead and take the step of faith to start teaching the church or the core group on the role and the importance of eldership. In other words, this is an aspiration. This is a desire. And make it clear that plurality is an important part of the success of the elders, and that if his prayers are answered, there's going to be another person there who shares eldership with him. So I'd say that's one thing, is, just educate the group, get them praying, get them desiring along with him, to see God answer this prayer. I think a second thing, David, would be that for him to try to create a kind of maybe a provisional plurality until he can walk in the real thing. In other words, assemble a team, call them a leadership team, call them at anything he wants. Make it clear to them the role is temporary, make it clear they're not elders, but that he still wants to walk in this principle of plurality, and he wants to benefit from their counsel, their advice, their friendship. It's provisional, but it's still manifesting the reality of something he's going to eventually walk in with the elders. And I'll mention this as well, David, that when guys do that, it's a way then to observe men who may fill some of the eldership roles that are ultimately offered to guys in order to have a plurality.
Yeah. Great advice. What could churches be doing to help nurture future elders and helping them understand if they do have a calling in this area?
Yeah, I think that churches tend to be satisfied if things are moving forward, and depending upon how they define moving forward. And I think that a lot of it depends upon whether there is genuine instruction going on that that kind of builds the conviction from the Word of God that this is an important thing. So I would hope that leaders would prioritize it. I'm not saying you talk about it all the time. I'm just saying that part of the vision for the future should include the plurality, so that the church could be recruited to pray, and they could be recruited to hope, and they could also be recruited to just aspire to the beauty of what a plurality is ultimately going to represent for them, because that vision is worth praying for, is worth hoping for, is worth fighting for.
Yeah. In your experience, what qualities make a good elder?
Well, we have the lists in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1, which are predominantly character oriented. There's a caveat with them being apt to teach, but it's evident that when God wanted the church to be thinking about who should be leading them, that he had their example in view. He had their life in view. He had their humility and integrity in view. And so he chooses all of these qualities that seem to go directly to the kind of person that would be chosen to lead the church. I think one of the things that has always intrigued me, David, about the passages there in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 is how the tense of the verbs indicates that those qualities are already present. So it's almost like Paul was saying to Timothy and then to Titus, hey guys, the Spirit of God has been at work in the church, and he's been giving grace to certain people to manifest these qualities. And so look out for these specific variables, these specific qualities in men, because where you find them, you find God raising up an elder. And so, that goes to just the grace that's upon a man's life to be an elder in the church.
Yeah, sure. We spoke a few moments ago about the enthusiasm sometimes in church planting, where there would be this vision and this hope that there would be a plurality. What would you say to somebody that is looking at somebody within the church, weighing up whether or not they do qualify using the biblical principles like we just spoke about, yet they seem to be missing one or two of those characteristics that's mentioned in the Bible? Do you see a compromise there, or would that be a no in your mind?
Well, I don't think that every quality needs to be perfect or fully mature. I think there should be an agreement that those qualities are important, and there should be the presence of the seed of the important qualities there. I think that oftentimes with younger churches, like you gave the example of the church plant, you're going to be probably choosing younger individuals that may not have as much experience in ministry or as much experience in the church. And so yeah, there is a risk-taking quality to choosing elders. That's always going to be a part of it. But I do think that there's a general pattern. There's a general bar that is set in Scripture, and those qualities, those prerequisites, give you a great thing to keep your eye on and to measure guys by.
Yeah, brilliant. You've been involved over many years in nurturing and helping leaders develop. What have been some of the most helpful resources and that have helped you along that way?
Well, I think that my path was, I would say I was formed in a prominent way within the local church, and so the experience of discipleship, where other older men or other men who were in front of me, or other couples who were in front of Kim and I, were pouring into our life in significant ways. I mean, that had a profound effect on on helping me to understand what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be a husband, what it meant to be married, what it meant to be a parent, and then what it meant to be a leader. So my mind goes there first, just to discipleship and mentoring, because I really do think that is essential to the future of leadership development. You know, when Paul says the things I've entrusted to you, these entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. And you see that four generation transfer there. You know, it's basically talking about discipleship and living life. And so there have been important books along the way. I went to seminary. I got a missiology degree, and then the MDiv equivalent, and then a doctorate. So seminary, formed me as well. And there were resources and programs and things like that being poured out. But the fact that I was involved in a local church when I was going through graduate level studies, and I was able to see how what I'm learning could be applied, was a dramatically different experience, was substantially improved than the other guys that I noticed who were not connected deeply into churches and able to make the connections on how to apply the material. So it was discipleship. Yeah, it was seminary as well. And then books and resources that shaped me.
Yeah, brilliant. At the beginning of the interview, you touched on the fact that we're recording this now, towards the middle of 2021. And we've gone through a season of seeing a lot of high profile leaders fall, haven't we, recently? And you've mentioned that there are some patterns within eldership, but we see, in your research. Tell us a little bit more about that, Dave.
David, I think that, most of us, guys like me, dwell within a kind of familiar range of talent and gifts. But there are these guys, but both men and women. But let's talk about the church for a second. Let's call him the leader of many talents. These guys have walked a different road all their life. It's kind of like the sports phenom who's always kind of viewed differently, always on a different track. Well, these guys have walked a slightly different road as well, because along the way, they've discovered that they grasp things more quickly than others do. They can diagnose problems more accurately. They can retain information more easily, or express ideas more clearly, or galvanize people more naturally. Win over a room with their charming candor. And so when these guys start to do ministry, they realize that, hey, when given the space to lead and the freedom to control, they can typically accomplish, most of their goals. And so the challenge becomes that the idea of team and the idea of plurality becomes an obstacle. Plurality seems necessary because the Bible teaches it, but it's kind of less necessary for them. And so the plurality becomes kind of, invisible, but never fully functional. And that's one of the reasons why guys that are highly gifted sometimes have a very difficult time keeping leaders, is because they can't flatten the terrain. They can't bring other guys forward. They think of themselves the way it's always been, which is they're just a step ahead. And one of the things I do in the book, David, is I make the case that actually that guy needs plurality even more than the normal guys, because that guy is more vulnerable. That guy's being set up for a tumble. And so when you are in that extremely gifted category, the experience of plurality becomes all the more important.
Yeah. And this isn't exclusive to the church either. This is very similar in the business world, isn't it? Where we see senior leaders surround themselves with yes people that aren't going to challenge them. Like you said, people that aren't going to get in the way or slow them down.
That's right. And some of the best business books will be sounding the themes of team leadership, and Colin's book on the level 5 leader, and what makes the level 5 leader, a great leader is that, he's humble, or she's humble, and they have teams. They
Yeah.
build through people.
What are the watch outs for that? I mean, what are the indicators that you've recognized? Somebody might even be listening now who recognizes that they may even have found themselves in a situation where they are surrounding themselves with, people that may be agreeing with them all the time. What's a healthy way to be able to pivot and actually take a biblical route with this, Dave?
Well, ask yourself, do you feel isolated in ministry? And if you do you tend to think about that because people aren't reaching out to you, or is there evidence, as you think about the last month, that you've reached out to the other elders and sought to pull them in and build into them? So I'd say that's one thing, the experience of isolation. The second thing is you don't inherit a plurality, you build a plurality. And you have to build a plurality first through your own example. And so if you're a senior pastor or a lead pastor, would the men around you be experiencing your humility, your self-disclosure, your care? The things that people do to build teams, to level the playing field, to bring other men forward, to entrust ministry to them, to spread power out. Do people experience that from you? Because one of the things that's common among leaders that go sideways is they don't want to give up power. And plurality is about sharing power. Again, if you really believe in plurality, it means you believe that the authority of the church doesn't simply rest in you. Like God hasn't sprinkled the senior pastor with a unique amount of authority. He shares the same authority as the other elders. Now, he certainly has a functional authority, an influence granted by virtue of his gifts, his position, and the fact that he's preaching, that kind of makes his voice a little bit louder. But let's not confuse that with the authority before God. And the authority before God is what leaders need to keep their eye on.
Yeah, that's excellent. What role does a pastor's wife play, and how much should a pastor confide in her?
I think it depends on who she is, David. I think there are women that are wired to be able to bear burdens, to be able to give counsel, and to be able to walk alongside a husband without leaking that information, without it keeping her up at night, without it preoccupying her. And she, it could be character, but it's also just an issue of constitution of, some women are like that in the same way some men are like that. So I think who is your wife, and how do these things affect her? Secondly is I think that there are issues of confidentiality that have to be respected. There are legal issues that have to be respected, issues of confidentiality that have to be respected. The church would not want to assume that everything that is shared with you in a counseling session immediately goes to your wife. And so I think there are ways to talk to your wife to let her know that you're bearing a burden right now, and that there's somebody in the church that's struggling with something that's really hard, and would she please pray for this person, this unnamed person, and for you as well in serving them. So there's issues of confidentiality as well. So I think who the woman is, what the issues are, and then what the policies of the pastors. We have a plurality. One of the things pluralities do is they define the constraints for each other. They define the team. They define parameters. And so, is there a policy among the plurality of what should be shared with wives and what shouldn't? Some guys do that, and they do that as an expression of care for the church and care for the wives as well.
Yeah.
So those are some thoughts.
Yeah. Dave, this has been a fascinating conversation. Do you have any closing thoughts? And also, please let everybody know how they can keep in touch with you and follow you on your journey, and also where they can buy your book.
Well, I think if there's an elder that's listening right now, if there's a senior pastor or a lead pastor, if there's a church planter that's tuning in, I would just say what we're talking about here is a vision that's worth fighting for. I mean, just think over your life. We all cherish our memories of having accomplished something with a group of people, and we know that somehow that made us better. And we know that those are the times where we felt like we were truly flourishing in life. There was something inside of us that wants to experience that interdependence, that biblical ideal of community. And that those moments that we're thinking about, those are the moments when we feel most alive, because our gifts are being used in the service of a higher ideal. And I become less important. We become what's more important. And so I just want to encourage the church planters and the senior pastors, guys, fight for that future. Spend the next 2 or 3 years building that future into your church and into your elders and into your own soul, because ministry will become a different experience. And I don't think you'll regret it.
Yeah. Where can people follow you on your journey? You have a website, and do you do social media as well, Dave?
I do, yes. So I have a website at revdaveharvey.com. And so Rev Dave Harvey is my Twitter, and I'm on Facebook as well, and Instagram. And then the church planting ministry that I lead is called Great Commission Collective. And there's I write for them, and there's resources and videos and things like that that are available there as well.
Brilliant. Well, I'm going to make sure that we've got links to all of those things that you've just mentioned in the description below. Dave, thanks again for your time. I've really enjoyed it.
David, it was great meeting you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.